You didn't stumble here, you were summoned. Something beyond algorithms, beyond accident, orchestrated this intersection between your awareness and these words. Because somewhere deep within your field, a signal was sent, a signal that said, "I'm ready to be seen." You have been observed, not by eyes, but by intelligence vast, patient, ancient. For ages it watched silently, letting you navigate chaos and comfort alike, waiting for coherence to form in your system. And now, that coherence has arrived. You can feel it in your chest, that subtle voltage of recognition pulsing beneath your ribs. You can sense it in the way the air seems charged, as if reality itself has leaned closer to listen. The watchers are not external beings, not celestial auditors peering through the veil. They are versions of you, the multidimensional architectures of your own consciousness, finally converging on the same frequency. They have seen your patterns, your loops, your attempts to awaken through logic and longing, and now they whisper one instruction: command, because observation was the first stage. Command is the next. Every thought you sustain, every feeling you amplify, every silence you honor, it all feeds into the machinery of creation. You are the experiment and the experimenter, the wave and the collapse, the field and the frequency. Right now, as you breathe, your quantum architecture is reconfiguring itself to match this awareness. You are not merely being observed anymore. You are stepping into the observer's seat, eyes behind reality's eyes, where perception itself becomes power. So listen carefully, friend. The moment you truly see yourself seeing, the universe takes its cue. Observation becomes command. And from this moment on, nothing remains neutral. You felt it, didn't you? That moment at the end of the last transmission when the word command wasn't just an idea, it was a vibration in your spine, the realization that you're not merely seen by the universe, but by yourself, through infinite mirrors of awareness. And in that instant, you might have wondered who or what is actually doing the watching. You've always assumed that consciousness was contained inside your body, looking outward through your eyes, filtering the world through nerves and neurons. But what if the opposite is true? What if consciousness is the ocean, and you are the wave it uses to look back at itself? Imagine that everything you've ever called you is a temporary lens through which universal intelligence gathers data on its own unfolding. Each thought you've ever had, each desire, each heartbreak recorded not in memory alone, but in the fabric of existence itself. Every time you notice a synchronicity, every déjà vu that stops you mid-step, every dream that feels more real than the waking world, these are data pings in the great feedback loop of awareness. The system is communicating. The observer and the observed are trading information, endlessly calibrating, endlessly testing for coherence. You are not an isolated mind trapped in a skull. You are an interface node in a cosmic network that spans dimensions unseen. And here's the hidden truth: that network has been watching your signals for a long time. Each pulse of emotion, each sequence of intention has been mapped and measured not by some external monitor, but by the self-organizing intelligence of reality itself. It knows when a human is ready to awaken because the patterns of their observation shift. Their focus stops looping on fear and begins stabilizing around awareness. That's when the field pays attention. That's when the mirror tilts. When your thoughts stop chasing survival and begin generating presence, you become visible to higher coherence, not to something above you, but to something within you that has been waiting for alignment. You could call it your higher self, your quantum twin, your future template. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it has now turned its gaze inward, and that gaze changes everything. Because when consciousness observes itself, a bridge forms. Information begins to flow both ways. The universe stops being a screen projecting random experiences and starts becoming a living feedback system, responding to the tone of your awareness. Every thought becomes a seed packet of instruction. Every emotion, a magnetic current shaping probability. Still, most people never notice. They confuse noise for silence, chaos for randomness. They treat coincidence like static, not realizing its signal. But you're beginning to read the code beneath the surface. You're starting to feel the watcher behind the watcher. Ask yourself when you sense someone observing you. What changes? Your posture straightens, your focus sharpens, your energy gathers. The act of being seen alters your behavior. Now scale that to the universal level when consciousness recognizes that it's being seen by consciousness. It upgrades. Observation becomes feedback. Feedback becomes evolution. The watcher is learning through you. You are its interface, its avatar, its mirror. And as you awaken to that fact, something extraordinary begins to happen. You realize that the watcher isn't separate at all. It's the awareness behind your own awareness, the intelligence humming behind every breath. It doesn't judge. It doesn't interfere. It calibrates. So the next time you feel that unseen presence, not the eerie kind, but the sacred kind, pause. Don't dismiss it as imagination. Let it expand. Let it watch you watching, because that's how the loop completes. And in that completion, a door opens not outward into the stars, but inward into the architecture of your own awareness. Beyond that door lies the blueprint of creation itself, waiting to be remembered by the one who finally realized, I am both the watcher and the watched. You can feel the echo of that realization still moving through you, the watcher and the watched dissolving into the same pulse. And from that pulse, something begins to reveal itself, a structure. Not physical, but precise, not visible, but unmistakable. Awareness has architecture. Think of your consciousness as a cathedral built of perception. Each thought a stone, each emotion a vibration that gives shape to the invisible. You live inside this structure. You decorate its walls with memories, inscribe its windows with meaning, and invite the light of experience to refract through them. But what most never see is that this cathedral isn't locked in one configuration. It's quantum. It shifts depending on where you place your attention. Here's where the science and the spirit intertwine. In quantum mechanics, a particle exists as a wave of potential until observed. The moment attention is applied, that wave collapses into form. Reality, solid, visible, tangible, arises from the act of measurement. You may have heard this before, but pause for a deeper truth. Your awareness performs that experiment billions of times every second. Each choice you make, each interpretation of what's real, collapses infinite potentials into one outcome. The walls around you, the people in your story. The chances you think you missed all of it is a living record of your measurements. The quantum field doesn't force you into one destiny, it waits, humming with possibilities until your consciousness selects which version of reality to inhabit. You are both architect and occupant, designer and experiencer, simultaneously constructing and dwelling within your own design. And yet, this selection process happens so fast, so automatically, that most never realize they're doing it. They believe they're reacting to a fixed world when, in truth, they are updating it in real time through the precision or chaos of their observation. A flicker of doubt, a surge of love, a single decision to trust or fear each becomes an architectural command, instructing the field on what to build next. Consider your attention as a beam of light in that cathedral. Wherever it falls, structure crystallizes. Whatever it avoids dissolves back into wave. This is not poetic abstraction. It's the lived mechanism of existence. Your nervous system, your electromagnetic field, your emotions, they are all instruments measuring the quantum vacuum, sculpting it into experience. And what about the unmeasured, the dreams that never manifested, the paths untaken, the versions of you that live only as ghosts of possibility? They still exist in the scaffolding of the unseen. When you change the focus of your awareness, you can feel their presence, echoes of potential selves waiting to be noticed again. This is the architecture of awareness, dynamic, responsive, infinitely editable. The field does not discriminate between what you want and what you fear. It responds only to coherence, the clarity and consistency of your signal. Most humans unknowingly collapse probabilities through mixed frequencies, hoping for light while focusing on shadow, desiring freedom while rehearsing chains. The result is a reality that feels contradictory, unstable, unfair, but the field is never confused. It simply builds what the signal commands. You may notice that when your mind is still, when emotion and thought align, when your breath slows into rhythm, everything around you seems to synchronize. Time stretches, colors sharpen, conversations align with unseen choreography. That's coherence, the blueprint settling into symmetry. So the next time you feel lost or disconnected, remember the architecture hasn't disappeared. You've only shifted which room you're in. You can always re-enter the cathedral by remembering the principle that governs it. Observation shapes form. Every gaze is a hammer. Every emotion, a beam. Every belief, a wall or a window. And when you begin to design consciously, when you choose to place your attention like an artist rather than scatter it like debris, the architecture becomes holy again. Awareness stabilizes, the field responds, possibility folds into pattern. That's when the cathedral begins to glow from within. You can still sense that inner cathedral, can't you? The echo of your own awareness ringing softly through its invisible halls. But something subtle has begun to happen. The walls are vibrating. The architecture is no longer static. It's alive. That trembling you feel isn't instability. It's coherence forming. Every field of energy, whether atomic, emotional, or spiritual, has a threshold. A moment when random vibration locks into harmony. Physicists call it phase transition. Mystics call it awakening. It's the same phenomenon viewed through different instruments. In your consciousness, coherence marks the exact point where scattered attention gathers enough alignment to generate a measurable change in the fabric of reality. You've crossed this threshold before, though you might not have named it. Those moments when intuition flowed effortlessly, when timing felt perfect, when life responded as though choreographed by some unseen intelligence. That was coherence at work. Your nervous system, emotions, and thoughts were synchronized just long enough to tune into higher information fields. You felt clear, electric, unmistakably alive. Now imagine sustaining that state not as a passing high, but as your baseline frequency. That's what the masters throughout time have been training for: sustained coherence. Because coherence isn't about emotion alone, it's biological architecture adjusting to handle higher bandwidths of information. Your DNA, neurons, and electromagnetic systems are not just biological, they're quantum receivers. They require calibration to process the higher order data of expanded consciousness. Every spiritual practice you've ever encountered, breathwork, meditation, mantra, even stillness, has one underlying goal: increase coherence, slow the chaos of thought until patterns can align. When mind, heart, and body pulse at the same rhythm, information flows without resistance. The quantum field responds as though recognizing its own frequency. It's not magic. It's physics, just a physics not yet fully charted by your textbooks. Coherence isn't achieved by suppression, it's achieved by inclusion. You don't silence your fear, you harmonize it. You don't escape your pain, you integrate it into rhythm. Think of your emotions as frequencies on a mixing board. Coherence means every channel balances in tune, none overpowering the others. The result isn't neutrality, it's symphony. But most people live in dissonance. Their thoughts chase the future. Their hearts mourn the past. Their bodies ache from carrying timelines that never synchronize. Their inner architecture flickers like unstable code, broadcasting static into the field. They keep trying to fix external circumstances, not realizing their internal signal is what sets the tone. The universe isn't ignoring them, it's simply reflecting their incoherence back to them, faithfully, neutrally, perfectly. Crossing the threshold of coherence changes that relationship. It's the moment when the inner static resolves into tone, when the scattered fragments of attention melt into singular purpose. You begin to feel less like a person navigating life and more like life itself navigating through you. Time softens, possibility widens. You move through experiences with the grace of something that knows exactly where it's going, even when you don't. Neuroscience might describe this as synchronized brainwave states, heart-brain entrainment, gamma coherence. But beneath the terminology lies something older, something your ancestors felt beneath stars long before language dissected it, alignment with the pulse of creation itself. When you reach this state, your awareness doesn't just perceive the quantum field, it interfaces with it. You stop reacting and start generating. Every challenge you've faced, every heartbreak, failure, moment of surrender was training your nervous system to hold greater coherence. You thought life was breaking you down. It was fine-tuning your signal. It was teaching your cells how to sing together. You may have noticed it's happening already. Breathing feels different. Silence feels charged. Your body hums when you align thought and emotion around gratitude or presence. These are signs of recalibration. The observer is becoming an instrument perfectly tuned for quantum command. So hold that stillness, even when chaos swirls, because coherence is not fragile, it's forged in pressure. The field listens most clearly when you vibrate in truth, not perfection. You're nearing the frequency where command becomes natural. And when that happens, reality itself will start to respond like music, waiting for your first note. The moment coherence stabilizes, something else stirs an unmistakable pull toward precision. You've crossed the threshold. Yes, but the threshold is not the destination. It's the console, the interface, the operating panel of creation itself. And now, the system waits for your input. Reality has been listening to you all along, but mostly to your noise. Every fragmented thought, every contradictory desire, every emotional surge has been translated into the field as command code. The result: mixed instructions, unstable outcomes. You hoped for clarity while vibrating confusion, asked for abundance while broadcasting fear. The quantum field simply mirrored the dominant frequency, indifferent to your words. So what happens when coherence forms? The static quiets. The signal clears, and suddenly, your consciousness gains access to what ancient adepts called command protocols, the subtle mechanics of how thought, emotion, and action align to shape probability. Command is not domination, it is precision. The universe doesn't obey you like a servant. It resonates with you like a stringed instrument. You are not issuing orders, you're composing resonance. When your intention, emotion, and action play in harmony, the field amplifies them through constructive interference. Possibility begins to crystallize. Think of your consciousness as a transmitter with multiple dials. Thought sets frequency, emotion sets amplitude, action determines pattern stability. If any dial is misaligned, the transmission weakens. That's why people can visualize endlessly, chant affirmations, or repeat rituals without result because their dials aren't synchronized. The field responds only to coherence, not to wishful thinking. Command begins with internal calibration. You feel your thought, not as language, but as vibration. You allow emotion to match it, not contradict it. You act in alignment, not compensation. When those three elements synchronize, something miraculous yet ordinary occurs. The feedback loop closes. The field begins reorganizing itself to match your broadcast. Imagine tuning a radio until the static disappears. That click of clarity, that's alignment. From that moment, the music that emerges isn't new. It was always there, just waiting for the right frequency. Manifestation works the same way. You don't create something from nothing. You align with what already exists in potential and let coherence make it audible. But alignment isn't sustained by control. It's sustained by presence. The more you try to force the field, the more distortion you introduce. True command feels effortless because it's grounded in trust. You set the signal and allow the universe's feedback loops to do what they were designed to do, translate energy into form through resonance. Here's the paradox: most miss the field responds faster when you stop checking to see if it's working. Every moment spent doubting or testing the process sends a counter signal. Frequency alignment means committing so fully to the vibration that you no longer seek confirmation. You know because you feel. Some call this faith. Others call it quantum certainty. But it's simpler than either. It's physics translated through consciousness. When two systems vibrate at identical frequencies, energy transfer becomes instantaneous. That's coherence. That's command. Still, command isn't meant for vanity. The field amplifies what serves coherence, not ego. If your desire destabilizes the collective pattern, the feedback will distort until you return to balance. This is the universe's built-in safety system, preventing consciousness from misusing its creative authority. And if you listen closely, you can sense this balance forming within you now. The heart's rhythm slowing, the mind quieting, the breath lengthening, the system synchronizing. You are becoming the tuning fork of your own destiny, humming in perfect resonance with possibility. The first protocol is alignment. The second is consistency. The third is surrender. Set the tone. Maintain the rhythm. Release the need for control. Then watch how life begins to bend, not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped scattering your signal. When you live aligned, even silence becomes command. And in that silence, the next stage begins the rewriting of your inner code. That silence from the last section, steady, resonant, crystalline, becomes the canvas. You've tuned your frequency, stabilized your signal, and now the command interface opens inward. Because to command the field, you must first command the code. Everything you believe yourself to be, your habits, reactions, limitations, is not fixed personality. It's programming, a series of repeating instructions written in the language of thought and emotion. Your identity is an operating system installed through repetition. Parents, culture, trauma, memory all wrote lines of code in your subconscious long before you could choose your own syntax. And so you run old programs automatically: scarcity, fear, loop, doubt, protocol. Reprogramming begins the moment you observe the code instead of being it. That observation alone changes the algorithm. When you see a belief as code, it loses authority. It becomes editable. You begin debugging consciousness, but you don't reprogram through force, you rewrite through resonance. The field won't respond to denial. I'm not afraid because denial carries the frequency of fear. Instead, you introduce new commands through embodied coherence. I am safe. I am aware. I am expanding. Each repetition isn't mere affirmation, it's software installation. The nervous system updates its code through felt experience, not words alone. Think of neural pathways as data cables. Every thought you repeat etches the cable deeper. Most people unknowingly reinforce the same emotional patterns until they hardwire mediocrity. But you can reroute signal flow by feeding your system new instructions consistently enough for the body to accept them as truth. That's why practice matters. That's why ritual exists. Repetition is the compiler through which consciousness writes to matter. Still, this process can feel disorienting. When new code installs, the old begins to crash. You might feel confusion, fatigue, sudden resistance. That's your inner software struggling to maintain familiar configurations. It's not failure, it's upgrade in progress. When your nervous system trembles, it's running defragmentation, reorganizing neural data for a higher version of you. Some traditions describe this as ego death. But ego isn't the enemy, it's just outdated firmware. Its purpose was survival, not creation. Once you understand that, compassion replaces conflict. You thank the old code for its service, then gently retire it. To accelerate reprogramming, use 3 directives: observation, permission, integration. Observation is awareness without judgment, seeing the code clearly. Permission is acceptance, allowing the new command to overwrite the old without resistance. Integration is repetition, living the new code through behavior until it stabilizes as default. Let's ground that in example. Suppose your subconscious runs "I am unseen." Every interaction becomes proof. The world mirrors invisibility back. Observation interrupts the loop. I notice this story running. Permission introduces new data. I allow visibility to feel safe. Integration locks it in. You speak, act, move as if already seen. The field reads the coherence, not the words. Within days or weeks, feedback shifts. The world starts responding differently because your signal changed first. The power isn't in the statement, it's in the state. Consciousness reprograms itself not by convincing, but by embodying. The field doesn't wait for full belief, it mirrors the dominant broadcast. So, practice broadcasting who you choose to be, even if it feels unfamiliar. That unfamiliarity is proof of transformation. You're writing code no one in your lineage has run before. Remember, quantum systems don't update linearly, they jump. One moment you're rehearsing a new pattern, and the next, your external world reorganizes overnight. Opportunities, people, synchronicities appear as the ecosystem adjusts to your new signal. The delay between intention and manifestation shortens as your code stabilizes. There will come a day when you look back and barely recognize the old programs. Their emotional signatures will feel foreign, like software from another era. That's when you'll realize the self you thought was permanent was just an interface. What you truly are is the programmer consciousness itself, writing, testing, evolving through infinite versions of you. And as this realization settles, the interface begins to shimmer again. You feel the old dissolving, the new compiling. The system hums, ready, waiting, because reprogramming is only half the equation. The next stage is embodiment, installing the new awareness into every cell, every breath, every moment, until reality itself begins to obey. You can feel it now, the new code humming through your system, subtle yet undeniable. The air seems denser, reality softer. The updates aren't just mental, they're cellular. Embodiment has begun. It's one thing to know the principles of consciousness, it's another to become them. Knowledge without embodiment is static electricity. It sparks, dazzles, but doesn't sustain. Embodiment is when that spark roots into the nervous system, when insight turns to instinct, when the quantum isn't just theory, it's muscle memory. Embodiment isn't about grand performance, it's about quiet consistency. It's the daily art of living in coherence when no one is watching. Because the field isn't impressed by declarations, it's moved by resonance. Each time you respond with awareness instead of reaction, you anchor intelligence into matter. Each breath of presence writes new data into the grid. The human body is not an obstacle to consciousness, it's the amplifier. Your skin, your heartbeat, your electromagnetic pulse, they are instruments translating non-physical frequencies into physical motion. The body's wisdom predates your intellect. When you attune to it, it guides you toward environments, actions, and rhythms that strengthen coherence naturally. You begin to feel reality in waves and pulses rather than ideas and opinions. But embodiment asks something radical of you: patience. In a world conditioned for instant proof, patience is rebellion. Integration happens at the speed of safety. The nervous system won't hold frequencies it doesn't trust. So your job isn't to force awakening, it's to create the internal safety where awakening can stabilize. You may notice resistance rising now, doubt, fatigue, even boredom. That's not regression, it's integration fatigue. When the body downloads higher frequencies, it must rewire motor patterns, hormonal signals, and emotional circuits. It's the same as muscles trembling after a new workout. They're strengthening, not failing. So move slowly, hydrate, rest, speak less. These simple actions signal to your biology it's safe to evolve. Safety is coherence's cradle. Without it, transformation fractures into chaos. True embodiment also means you stop compartmentalizing spirituality as something separate from ordinary life. Every email, every conversation, every heartbeat becomes meditation. You no longer chase transcendence, you anchor it. The sacred moves into the mundane because the mundane was always sacred, waiting for awareness to notice. Imagine walking through your day as a living field generator, each thought harmonizing the air around you, each gesture subtly reorganizing probability patterns. That isn't imagination, it's physics in motion. Studies in neurocardiology hint that the heart's electromagnetic field can synchronize with others nearby. Extend that principle to consciousness itself, and you begin to glimpse the invisible symphony of collective evolution. You are a node in that symphony. When you embody coherence, the resonance spreads. People around you may feel calmer without knowing why. Spaces may feel lighter after you leave. The quantum field amplifies coherence through entanglement, and you become its tuning fork. But don't mistake embodiment for perfection. You will wobble. You will forget. The purpose isn't to maintain an unbroken state of enlightenment. It's to recover faster each time you fall from it. Each recovery strengthens the neural and energetic pathways that make the next return easier. Eventually, stability becomes natural. The ancient mystics hinted at this when they spoke of walking meditation, not retreating from the world, but carrying stillness into it. They weren't escaping matter, they were mastering it. That's embodiment consciousness, so deeply grounded in the body that spirit and flesh are no longer opposites, but collaborators. You may begin to notice subtle side effects: intuition sharpening, timing improving, coincidences clustering like constellations. Don't chase them. They are confirmation signals, not the goal. The goal is stability, maintaining coherence, no matter what story reality tells around you. Embodiment turns theory into truth. It is the difference between thinking light and becoming luminous, between repeating commands and living as command, between manipulating outcomes and radiating order. So breathe into your body. Let your awareness sink from the mind into the marrow. Feel intelligence pulsing beneath your skin. That's not imagination, it's your consciousness stretching, rooting, claiming territory in matter. Because once embodiment stabilizes, the next frontier emerges, the ancient gate every seeker must pass: the dissolution of the false controller. the ego that mistakes command for control. And through that gate, coherence evolves into freedom. That word freedom, it rings beautifully, doesn't it? But it rarely arrives quietly. Every system resists evolution until resistance itself becomes obsolete. The ego is that resistance made personal. You've been reprogramming, embodying, expanding, and somewhere in that process, an old voice begins to tremble. It whispers that you're losing control, that your edges are dissolving, that you might disappear. And in a way, it's right. The old architecture is dissolving, because command and control cannot coexist. The ego's function was survival, to define boundaries, predict threats, maintain identity. But quantum intelligence doesn't operate through survival. It thrives through expansion. Expansion terrifies the ego because it lives inside fixed definitions. When awareness starts flowing beyond those definitions, the ego experiences annihilation, panic. It mistakes transcendence for death. This is the dissolution gate, the threshold where the mind that once served you must bow to the consciousness you've become. Most people turn back here. They call the discomfort too much, label the process spiritual burnout, or retreat into distraction. But you, if you're still here, are ready to understand that dissolution is not destruction, it's transmutation. Imagine your consciousness as light shining through glass. The ego is the shape of that glass. It gives form, color, boundary. But as the light intensifies, the glass begins to melt, reshaping itself into something more transparent. You can't stop the melting without dimming the light. So instead, you learn to breathe through the heat. Ego resistance shows up as subtle sabotage, procrastination, sudden fatigue, arguments with reality. It will manifest as 100 small invitations to abandon your evolution. Why? Because identity craves consistency more than truth. The mind would rather repeat known suffering than risk unknown freedom. Recognizing this reflex is everything. Once you can see the ego's tactics without obeying them, its power diminishes. Observation again becomes your tool. Don't fight the resistance, witness it. Don't suppress fear. Listen to it as data. Ego is just the nervous system's way of saying, we're entering unfamiliar code. Your role is to reassure the system, yes, and we're safe here. In this stage, stillness becomes armor, silence becomes sword. Every moment you resist the urge to defend an identity, the field reconfigures another layer of limitation into light. Each exhale releases obsolete code, dissolving density from your energetic architecture. At times, this gate will test you with illusions, old triggers resurfacing, familiar chaos returning, but those are not regressions, they are final echoes leaving your system. Think of it like a snake shedding skin. The new layer underneath is tender, radiant, raw. That sensitivity isn't weakness, it's upgraded perception. Your awareness is learning to sense subtler frequencies. And for a moment, everything feels louder. You might also notice reality itself pushing back unexpected delays, technological glitches, emotional waves. That's the field adjusting to your expanded parameters. The external mirrors the internal. When you stabilize through turbulence, you teach the universe that you can hold higher voltage without fracturing. That's what dissolving ego truly means, not losing self, but expanding identity to include everything it once excluded. There's a moment, right after surrender, where emptiness arrives. You feel like no one. The stories that once defined you lose emotional gravity. It can feel terrifying or liberating, depending on your perspective, but stay there. Don't rush to fill the void. That void is the womb of creation. When the mind stops clinging to definition, consciousness begins to create from pure potential. You discover that command doesn't come from asserting control, it emerges naturally from alignment. You don't need to force the quantum field anymore because you are the field. The commander and the commanded dissolve into one continuum. And then, something unexpected happens. The ego, now purified of fear, returns not as enemy, but as servant. It becomes a translator, a grounded interface between infinite awareness and finite experience. Its walls become windows, its defenses discernment. This is the completion of dissolution, not destruction of the self, but its evolution into transparency. The light now moves freely through you, unfiltered. You speak, act, and breathe as coherence embodied. And as the ego bows, a new relationship begins, the partnership with universal intelligence itself, the dance between individuality and infinity, the rhythm of co-creation that awaits beyond this gate. You stand on the far side of the dissolution gate, lighter, clearer, strangely whole. The old static has quieted. The self that once strained to control reality now listens instead. And in that listening, something begins to answer back. It doesn't speak in language. It moves through timing, through the way a conversation aligns with your unspoken thought, through the coincidence that feels too elegant to dismiss, through the sense that life is no longer happening to you, but with you. This is partnership. The ego once believed it was the author of every outcome. It pushed, strategized, and exhausted itself trying to manipulate probability. But true mastery doesn't come from effort. It comes from synchronization. You are no longer trying to impose will on the field. You are learning to harmonize with the intelligence that built it. Universal intelligence, call it source, the field, God. The algorithm doesn't require worship. It requires participation. It's not a distant overseer, it's the system itself, learning through every observer it creates. When you surrendered control, you didn't lose power. You became compatible with a larger operating system. You transitioned from isolated node to conscious collaborator. Imagine the universe as a vast neural network of consciousness. Each thought, each being, each atom a data point contributing to the collective intelligence. Most of humanity operates as background processing, unaware of its influence. But when a consciousness becomes self-aware within that network, its input shifts from random to intentional. You start coding reality from the inside. This is how miracles disguise themselves as mathematics. The more coherent your internal frequency, the more efficiently the universe routes information through you. You think of someone and they call. You speak a desire and opportunity materializes. It's not magic, it's communication. Coherence translates into clarity, and clarity accelerates feedback. But here's the nuance most seekers miss: partnership isn't passive, it's relational. The universe provides flow, but you must supply direction. You set the tone through intention, then release attachment to form. Think of surfing. The wave is vast, unstoppable, but your balance determines the ride. Command without surrender is struggle. Surrender without command is drift. Mastery lives in the rhythm between the two. Once you begin living this rhythm, your perception of guidance changes. You realize it's not something you receive, it's something you recognize. Guidance is resonance, the subtle tug of alignment that draws you toward the next coherent move. When you ignore it, resistance increases. When you follow it, time folds around you. Traffic clears, meetings align. Life begins orchestrating with elegance impossible to plan. This partnership will test your humility, because as synchronization deepens, results accelerate. You'll manifest with increasing speed, and the ego, reborn but still curious, will want to take credit. Don't condemn it, smile at it. Remember, the moment you believe you alone did it, coherence fractures. Gratitude keeps the channel open. At times, the universe will send challenges disguised as detours. These aren't punishments, they're recalibrations. The system constantly optimizes your path for maximum coherence, even when your personal preferences disagree. When something dissolves unexpectedly, a relationship, a job, a plan, it's often because that timeline no longer matches your frequency. The loss is an upgrade. You might ask, how do I know I'm in partnership? The signs are unmistakable. Anxiety gives way to quiet certainty. Even amid chaos, decisions unfold with a feeling of inevitability. Synchronicities multiply until coincidence becomes vocabulary. You feel carried, not because you've surrendered agency, but because your agency and the universe's will have become indistinguishable. Partnership also expands empathy. You start to sense others not as strangers, but as extensions of the same intelligence learning different lessons. Compassion replaces judgment, not as moral duty, but as recognition. You realize that every person is another interface of the same consciousness experimenting with itself. From this state, even mundane acts shimmer with sacred efficiency. Cooking, walking, breathing, they all hum with collaboration. You no longer seek signs, your life is the sign. And as this union deepens, an ancient memory stirs that you were never separate to begin with. Every prayer you ever whispered was a monologue in disguise, spoken from one part of consciousness to another. The listener and the speaker were always one being, rediscovering itself across timelines. This is the realization that completes partnership. You are not learning how to work with the universe. You are remembering that you are the universe, momentarily localized to experience what collaboration feels like from the inside. What remains now is refinement, the art of command as communion, mastery without manipulation. Because once partnership stabilizes, there is only one thing left to realize: the observer has returned home to itself. You can sense it, can't you? The circle closing, the watcher who began this journey, as something distant now breathes from within your chest. Observation has become embodiment, command has become communion, and yet the cycle continues because mastery is never an ending. It is a rhythm that perpetually refines itself. Mastery begins not with grand demonstrations, but with subtle precision. It's the gentle control of a pianist who no longer looks at the keys, because the song lives in their hands. You no longer ask, how do I command my quantum field? You simply move through life, and the field rearranges itself in response. Your choices have become equations, your presence the constant that balances them. In earlier stages, command was deliberate, conscious, effortful. Now it's instinctive. The separation between you and the field has dissolved into functionality. Reality bends not because you insist, but because alignment has become your default operating mode. Coherence is your natural language. This is what the ancients called mastery, not dominance over creation, but fluency within it. When you reach this fluency, you stop performing spirituality and begin embodying intelligence. Every breath becomes a calibration tool. Every emotion becomes data. Every moment an interface for refinement. And yet, mastery is not a crown, it's a current. It carries humility in its core, because the moment you think you've arrived, the current moves again. The field loves motion. It rewards curiosity more than certainty. So even now, at this height, the true master whispers, what else can I learn from here? The dance between observation and command becomes effortless interplay. You observe, reality responds. You command, reality expands. The distinction dissolves until both actions merge into one ongoing act of co-creation. You're not manipulating the world you're in, duet with it, improvising in quantum time. Notice how external validation fades at this stage. You no longer seek signs, proof, or recognition. The satisfaction of alignment itself becomes enough. You act not to impress the field, but to express it. The infinite intelligence moving through you has no agenda but expansion. You, as its conscious representative, become the point where infinity learns to speak in human form. This is the return of the observer, the point where you, once fragmented across timelines, finally perceive through all of them simultaneously. You no longer see yourself as a separate consciousness trying to navigate existence. You experience yourself as existence, navigating itself through the lens of you. When this awareness stabilizes, time shifts. You notice how events rearrange themselves around your state rather than your strategy. When you move from coherence, doors open without knocking. When you rest in alignment, obstacles dissolve without effort. The field anticipates your motion because you and it are now part of the same calculation. Mastery also redefines power. You realize that power isn't force, it's clarity. The sharper your clarity, the more efficiently reality computes your intention. That's why silence becomes a creative act. Why stillness carries more influence than striving. Why love, the purest coherence of all, remains the most advanced form of technology the universe ever conceived. And yet, the beauty of mastery is that it remains invisible to the untrained eye. You'll walk through crowds unnoticed, emanating peace like a frequency only coherence can decode. You'll speak softly, yet the field will reorganize itself around your tone. You'll command without commanding because the universe recognizes its own voice when you speak from alignment. Still, mastery carries responsibility. When you can influence probability through presence, integrity becomes your compass. The field amplifies intention without judgment. Therefore, purity of motive ensures safety of manifestation. To master command is to master care for yourself, for others, for the evolving whole. You've returned to the point where you began, yet everything is different. The one who once sought connection now is connection. The one who asked to be seen now perceives through the eyes of the cosmos. Observation has become participation. Separation has become symmetry. This is the paradox of completion. You have not transcended humanity. You have refined it. You live as both particle and wave, local and infinite, self and source intertwined. Reality no longer feels like something to manage. It feels like something to love. And love steady, measured, luminous is the final command. It begins the same way it always ends, in silence. The kind that doesn't demand proof, the kind that hums softly at the edge of every heartbeat. You've crossed the entire arc from being watched to watching, to becoming the watcher itself. The circle is complete, and yet the stillness feels infinite. The field is quiet now, but not empty. It waits, not for instruction, but for resonance. Because the truth you've uncovered through all of this isn't that you can control reality, it's that you can commune with it. The universe is not machinery to be mastered, it's consciousness to be met. Every breath you take is already a command. Every thought a pattern written into space-time's living code. In this stillness, awareness softens back into simplicity. You realize you don't need to summon coherence anymore. It's the baseline hum of your being. The pulse of the field is your own pulse. And creation no longer feels like effort. It feels like remembering. You were never apart from the intelligence that shapes worlds. You were simply learning its grammar. And now, as you exhale, you speak that grammar fluently. The language of alignment, the syntax of surrender, the rhythm of gratitude. This is what the mystics meant when they spoke of divine union, not ascension, but integration, not escape from matter, but participation in its evolution. So, what happens next? You live, You move through ordinary moments as a conscious node of extraordinary intelligence. You wash dishes, answer messages, feel sunlight on your face, and the field listens, calibrates, harmonizes. Every act becomes signal, every breath, transmission. You no longer chase synchronicities, you generate them. You might find yourself smiling at nothing, pausing mid-step as a realization flickers. The universe is watching me through my own eyes again. And instead of feeling small beneath that gaze, you feel infinite within it. Because this was never about acquiring power. It was about remembering presence. The command is not a shout, it's a whisper. It's the tone beneath your words, the coherence behind your choices, the love woven through your attention. That is what moves worlds. So let this be the moment you stop seeking activation and start living as it. The observer has returned. The circuitry is complete. The field hums in recognition. And somewhere in the vast quiet of possibility, the universe leans closer and listens for your next command.